Hello friends of Tutu Artist Studio. This is Emma from Tutu Celeste and from the Tutu Artist Studio podcast. I'm here today to show you a 3-video series. The first video in our Smash the Stash challenge for January and for the rest of the year. So I hope you'll join me. In our December podcast, Let's Talk About Tutu Plates, we also mentioned the Smash the Stash project, where you can make a tutu or costume with fabrics and trims that you already have. So I'm starting that project today, and I wanted to share with you sort of the steps as I go through that. I'm going to make a second video that goes over the gathering technique that I talked about in that same podcast. And you'll know that Casey also threw in a bonus challenge to learn a new technique. So I'm working on something I'd like to share with you in a little mini video that I'll make for the third in the series. If you'd like to join us in the Smash the Stash project, I hope you'll hashtag us, Smash the Stash and Tutu Artist Studio. We would love to see what you're working on. So to start out, I kind of went through my stash and I thought about lots of different things I could do, but I settled on this variety of fabrics that I had. None of which I had a full yard of. They all were kind of half a yard or a quarter yard, but I figured I could make this work. So I know I was kind of thinking something like sugar plum like, but I wanted the gold to be the primary color. I've made a lot of pink tutus, so I wanted to go back and make a gold tutu. So for the bodice, the two primary fabrics are going to be these two brocades. I have this leaf pattern brocade. The underside, it isn't quite reversible. This is kind of scratchy and it just doesn't, it looks like it's not really truly reversible. So I'll use this side. This fabric, I think I got from tutu.com a while back. It's really nice. It has a soft hand. One side is ivory with gold. The back side is primarily gold, and I really like this side. So I think these will be a nice contrast to each other. If I use the primary gold and this together, different panels of the bodice can have these. So some panels will be the gold primarily, and some of the panels will be with the leaf. So I will show you that. And then I have this kind of in-between brocade fabric that has the dusty rose in it, and also some gold and some dusty rose bengaline. So these are the fashion fabrics that I'm going to use for the bodice, and I might use some of it on the plate. We'll have to see what comes out of that. So I know those were the colors that I wanted to use, so I use Pinterest to help kind of come up with some ideas. I made a page for Smash the Stash, and I just pinned some different things that I had to come up with what kind of bodice I want to make, what colors I want to use, etc. And I'll share a link for that if you'd like to look. And then we'll start to talk about the first part of this project will be the net and building the tutu. But the first thing I need to do is kind of make a plan for my bodice as well as the tutu itself. So I know for my bodice, I wanted to use this Imperial Bodice pattern by Travis Halsey. I chose the size O based off of my high school senior measurements that I've been using. So I think this will be a good size for that type of dancer. So I wrote those measurements down so that if later I'm selling this tutu, I know exactly what size it will fit. And I made a cutting sheet, so I know how many layers are in the tutu, how much net I put in. So I planned this out with my 9-layer tutu. I'm making a 15-inch tutu, and then how many widths of fabric are going into each of those layers. And then the last piece is planning the dyeing, which is what we're going to focus on today. So I'm going to use ivory net, which I already had a bolt of. But I want to bring in that dusty rose is our accent color. So closest to the hip and on the underside of the tutu, the smallest layers will be dusty rose. The outside of the tutu will be the natural ivory net. And then I'm going to use like a soft pink to blend between the dusty rose and the ivory. So that's the plan for today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about dyeing. I know some folks enjoy dyeing and it's something that they do regularly, but if you haven't tried it or you're kind of worried about it or you're nervous about it, I'm hoping to challenge you to give it a try. You don't need much. I have a dirty laundry sink that I use. And I have a big soup pot if I'm dyeing larger amounts of fabric that I need to submerge. In this case, I'm just doing a little bit of dip dyeing, so I have this old pitcher that I'm going to use for that. All you need is nice hot water. It doesn't have to be boiling hot for net. It's just kind of hot bath water hot, and vinegar. So you put a little splash of vinegar into your dye bath and it will help set the color. And the three colors that I'm using today are petal pink, purple, and wine. And these colors together will make a dusty rose. So the best thing to do whenever you're dyeing is to make some swatches. So whatever fabric you're dyeing, make a few small swatches. So in this case, I have my ivory net. I made a few swatches of ivory net, and I tried those before I dip my good layers of net in it. I just use the samples to make sure I get the color right, and I keep my fabric nearby to match from. So the next thing I wanted to show you was my tutu layers. So I use the railroad cutting method, which means you have a packet of net for each layer. So I have 9 packets for a 9-layer tutu. If you use the technique where you have a piece for every width, you can do the same thing. You're just going to have more pieces to dye. So whatever technique is yours, feel free to go ahead with that. So I started my dye bath with the lightest. I know I wanted to do some light pink dyeing because the middle of my tutu needs to be pink. And so I started with just a pale pink dye bath, hot water, a little splash of vinegar, and I made a petal pink. I took my longest pieces, folded them in half, and then dyed the middle portions of these pieces for the longest layers. And then the middle layers of my tutu are primarily ivory and light pink. So they only got that light pink dye. Then, after everything light pink is done, I wanted to come back and make a dusty rose bath. So I went ahead and added wine and purple to my dye bath to get that dusty rose. I went back and dipped these corners into the dye bath. My middle layers I left alone. And then as I got to the lower layers, I started adding more dusty rose, started getting rid of the ivory, and you'll see my bottom 2 layers are pure dusty rose. So once that was all done, I made a small dye bath of just purple because I wanted to add a little bit of an ombre effect to this dusty rose net. So I just folded them in half and dipped the corners, the center apart corner to get a little purple in there as well. And then I kind of added a little purple here and there, as you can see on some of the edges of these as well. And it'll just add a nice kind of ombre effect. If you think that your layers look splotchy or they look like these look like they have very much like circle pieces, this is all going to blend together. So as you gather and you have layer upon layer upon layer, it'll really soften. So having some separate sections of color is actually, I think, a nice thing to have. It doesn't need to look like a perfect ombre like this 2-tone one does. So feel free to add some different variety to your dyeing. I usually lay out a garbage bag and some paper towels to blot them off, let them dry. So to continue with dyeing, I had to go on and think about the tutu panty itself. So I had in my stash some of this beige power net that I bought instead of ivory by mistake. So I definitely wanted to use this up, and I thought, well, I'll give it a try. I'll try to dye it in the same dye bath. And I got this shade, which is a little too dark, a little too blue, a little too gray for my dusty rose. But I like to do a 2-layer panty, so 1 layer of power net and 1 layer of sheer mesh. So I had some of this bright pink. Now it's a little too light for this, but again, with a little bit of dye, you can get anything to be, change that shade just a little bit. So I dyed it, and now I have this kind of bright rose color. And when the two are layered together, it'll give me a really nice dusty rose. So I'm pleased with that. That's going to turn out quite nice. And then the last little bit is, while I was dyeing, I looked at some appliques that I had. I had a lot of pink, but I didn't have a lot of dusty rose. So I had a lot of these separate appliques that came part of a lace that had a scallop edge. I used the scallop edge, but I had a ton of appliques left. So I threw that in the dye bath. And now I have a nice dusty rose set of appliques. So I hope you'll join me in the second video. I'm going to show you more about that gathering technique. So I'm going to take all this net and the panty and I'm going to build out my tutu base. I have actually already made my bodice, at least pieced it together, and I'll show you that. And I'm going to start the gathering technique and using leftover scrap trims and appliques to make a really fun tutu. So I hope you'll join us back. And just remember, if you plan to join us, I hope that you'll tag us at Smash the Stash and hashtag us at Tutu Artist Studio. Thank you very much. Have a great day.